Welcome back. Glad you're joining us for this study on the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 17, Jesus describes his relationship to the law of the Old Testament. He tells us that he's not come to throw out the Old Testament, he's come to fulfill it, to bring it to its logical fulfillment. To take us to the inner truth that the law was pointing us towards. And then he gives some examples. The first example is the example of anger. We talked about that in the last session. The second example he gives is one of lust. He says in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 27, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks on a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better that you would lose one of your members than your whole body would go into Gehenna." A couple of things to take note of. First of all, Jesus is, again, like he did in the last example, as he did in the last example, he's quoting from the Ten Commandments. And he reinforces that the Ten Commandments are correct. It's wrong to murder people. It's wrong to commit adultery. It's a terrible betrayal. It causes a deep psychological wound that often can never be healed. But now Jesus takes us even deeper. And he says, if you are avoiding killing people, that's a good thing. If you're avoiding committing adultery, that's a good thing. If you're being faithful to your spouse, that is a good thing. That's commendable. But it's not enough. Just like with murder, we need to go back and examine our hearts and guard our hearts against anger. So when it comes to adultery, we need to guard our hearts against looking at others with lustful intent. Now, that's, I think, been, I know that it's been misunderstood and caused a lot of real struggle for dedicated young Christians. I'm thinking particularly of Christian teenagers and young adults, because they have read that and felt like any kind of attraction, physical attraction that I have to another person is evil and it's wrong. And they kind of tie themselves in knots and work hard at not having any attraction. And that's not what Jesus is saying. It's perfectly normal with to see another person and to recognize that they're an attractive human being. After all, everybody's created in the image of God, and if you look deeply enough into the eyes and hearts of any human being, you'll find that they are beautiful. And there's certainly nothing wrong with seeing people as being physically attracted and recognizing that I am physically attracted to that person or to how that person looks. I may not even know that person. But what Jesus is talking about here is lustful intent. Uh, and that goes a step further. Lustful intent is looking at someone as an object to satisfy my lustful desires. It's looking at a person and in my heart thinking that I would really like to have sex with that person. And in fact, I would have sex with that person if the circumstances permitted it and if I was reasonably sure that I wouldn't get caught. That's lustful intent. It goes on all the time, goes on in every office setting, on every campus, in every place of business that has more than a couple of people working there. That lustful intent, that desire to have sex with that other person, and the intention that I would if I could. And the only thing that's holding me back is I don't have the opportunity, or that person's not coming on to me, or I might get caught, so I better not. Or maybe the only thing that's holding me back is, well, one of the 10 Commandments says I best not do this, so I'm going to stop. Jesus says, go back behind the adultery and guard your heart against lustful intent. And then he gives this hyperbolic illustration. And these kinds of illustrations were very, very commonly used by rabbis in Jesus' day. Everyone knew that they were not meant to be literal. It's the deliberate use of an exaggeration in order to drive home a point. And in this case, Jesus says, if your hand offends you, chop it off. If your eye offends you, dig it out. Because it would be better to enter into life with only one hand and one eye than it would be to wind up in Gehenna. Now, once again, as we mentioned last time, the word Gehenna, it's translated hell or hell of fire or something like that in most of our English translations. Gehenna was a physical place. It was a valley outside the wall of the ancient city of Jerusalem that way back in Old Testament times had been a place where people offered their children as sacrifices to false gods. And by the time we get to Jesus' day, this valley has become the town dump. The bodies of dead animals, the bodies of executed people. I started to say criminals, but Rome executed a lot of people who were innocent. So the bodies of executed people, the bodies of dead animals were thrown into this valley along with all the garbage and trash of the whole city, and the whole thing was set on fire, and it was continuously burning, and it was a place full of maggots. The worms never died and the fires never went out. Jesus is warning us that lustful intent can lead to adultery, which can lead to our own physical death. There's many a person that has been murdered, killed, in revenge for having committed adultery with someone else. And Jesus says that's a road you don't want to go down. That's a road you want to stay away from. It hurts you. It hurts God. It hurts, obviously, the person that you've betrayed. It hurts the person that you are betraying with. Using other people as objects misunderstands the purpose of the human body. Now, God is not a prude. God is not opposed to sex. God invented sex. But God invented sex not only for procreation, as in all mammals, but also as an intimate way of expressing love to a person that we have taken into our hearts and opened up our hearts to. And in a spiritual sense, the two become one. And in that sense, it is a beautiful expression of love within the human heart. But when I start looking at other people as just simply being objects, just some being there that I can use, when I start focusing on my own um, desires, my own passions, my own lusts, and I begin to see others not as humans created in the image and likeness of God, but instead as objects just there to be used and to satisfy me. That's the fundamental problem with personality disordered people. There are a number of diagnosable personality disorders. We think of narcissistic personality disorder. We think of um, histrionic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and such. And one of the things that they all have in common is that other people are not really seen as genuine people. The narcissist sees the world revolving around himself. He's not capable of having empathy. He's not capable of really putting himself in the place of those other people, of feeling what they feel. They are just a means to an end. They exist in order to make him fulfilled or happy or rich or whatever. When God gives us a new heart, He causes us to see other people, all other people, as created in the image of God, as beautiful creations of the living God, as women and men, as girls, as boys, that God loves so much that He came and died for. That God wants for them to live with Him forever. That God sets His love upon them and then gives us love for them and wants us to see them the way He sees them and value them the way He values them. When we do, we will be guarding our hearts against objectifying others. And that's what lustful intent is. It's objectifying another person. You can do it on a non-sexual level too. You can objectify a person and just simply use them as a means to an end, a way to climb the corporate ladder, manipulate them in order to get what you want. And it's essentially the same thing. Jesus says, guard your heart against that. Don't look at others as a means to an end. Don't objectify others. It speaks also of our biases and prejudices when we group people all in one big lump, and we come to these conclusions that all people who are like this have these characteristics. And that's what racists do. That's what homophobes do. That's what xenophobes do. And then we have characterized people without even knowing them, rather than looking at them the way God does. Each and every individual precious in his sight, each and every individual bearing the image, the stamp of God, the imago Dei, the image of God. Each and every individual valued by God, and each and every person an individual to be judged not by us but by God on her or his own merits. Jesus gives this hyperbolic illustration: cut your hand off, dig your eye out. Some people have suggested that lust often enters into us through inappropriate touching or inappropriate looking. And there's some truth to that. I think Jesus' point, though, is simply that we need to be radical with ourselves. We're not to go about demanding that other people live this way or do that or do the other thing, but just need to be radical with myself and make sure that I'm looking at others. I'm not objectifying others, but I'm looking at others with the love of God. There have been a lot of people around, many times Christian people, well-meaning often, but they have often, when it comes to sexual lust, they have given girls and women the impression that it's all on them. You know, make sure that you dress modestly, otherwise you're going to cause these men to stumble. I'm all for modesty, don't misunderstand. But it should not matter to me as a man how a woman dresses, modestly or immodestly, clothed or not clothed. I should not be objectifying her. I should not be looking at her as anything less than a child of the King. It's not her fault if I'm objectifying her, if I'm looking at her with lustful intent. It's my fault. And I need to deal with me. The answer to my lustful intent is not to go around throwing a sheet over top of every woman who's dressed in a way that I think is inappropriate. The way to deal with my lustful intent is to get alone with God and say, search me and try me and see if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting, and help me, Lord, to see others, all others, as you see them. To see women who are older than I am the same way I would see my mother. To see women who are my age or younger as sisters. To see men older than I am the way I would look at my father. To see men my age or younger as brothers, members of one family, not objects. God help us.